Good evening. Welcome back as we continue with the book of Genesis. Now, we're actually coming close to finishing this series on Genesis. We just have maybe 2 or 3 more weeks, including this one. And tonight we're going to be looking at essentially the end of the Joseph story. So we're going to be looking at chapters 42 through 44 in pretty summary fashion, because there's kind of a lot that goes on in these 3 chapters, but there's also a lot of repetition. So it's going to be kind of more of like a summary looking at some of the details. But this is essentially the climax and the conclusion to the main issues in the Joseph story. But before we do so, let's summarize last week, which was Genesis chapters 40 and 41. And so chapters 39 through 41 is Joseph by himself in Egypt as a slave. And we saw 3 successive scenes: Joseph in Potiphar's house, Joseph in the prison house, and then thirdly, Joseph in Pharaoh's house. And so that was basically Joseph's slow, agonizing descent to the lowest possible condition that he could possibly have imagined, to slavery, to being a prisoner in a foreign land. There's not much lower he could have gotten except for death. And so he's left essentially hopeless in prison with nothing, and then his dramatic rise back up to power. And so what we saw, we get a very strong understanding of Joseph's character in those 3 chapters. He shines forth as he is a moral person, he is committed to God, and he's committed to whomever he serves, wherever he's at. He's dutiful, he's faithful, and we also see that he is wise. And so the lesson we were supposed to gain from that, as I mentioned, is that no matter what our station, no matter what our condition, no matter who's in power, no matter who we serve or who we work for, we are to be dutiful, we are to be faithful, we are to be moral, we are to be committed through and through to the very end. Now, of course, this doesn't mean to just be a doormat. It doesn't mean to just accept whatever evil comes to you from other people. But it does mean when you are left with nothing and you have no other options, no matter what, we remain faithful and dutiful to the benefit of those whom we serve, as well as to those around us. And so we see Joseph is a model character in that regard. So before we begin today, let's say a prayer. Our Lord and God, we ask you, Father, for wisdom and guidance as we read through your scriptures that you have given to us, Lord, by your grace and mercy and love. We pray that we may learn to cherish these scriptures. We may learn to read them as you would have us read them, to be transformed by the words, and to become more like you and your Son, Jesus Christ. It is by his name that we pray. Amen. So in summary, what we see in these next 3 chapters, 42 through 44, and a little bit into 45 as well, but essentially 42 through 44, is that we see Joseph and his brothers finally meet at last. And so remember, in chapter 37, there was this split, there was this division between Joseph being sent into slavery into Egypt, separated from his brothers. Jacob, their father, is bereaved. So the family is left in a separated, divided state, and which essentially is closely related to murder, as we're going to see. Kidnapping, selling someone into slavery is very closely connected to murder itself. So even though it wasn't murder, that was avoided thanks to both Reuben's and Judah's efforts. Even though Reuben, his plan was foiled, he actually wanted to rescue Joseph. Judah's plan was carried out. They actually sold him into slavery. Essentially, that is very close to murder itself. And so finally, after Joseph is gone, he's gone through all of these hardships, and he's finally risen to power. And now, in these final chapters, they are going to be reunited in a very dramatic fashion. And so we're going to see reunion and we're going to see reconciliation between the brothers. Now, we can compare this to the previous stories in Genesis, where you would see the family continually splits off and never reconciles and never reunites. We see this with Abraham and Lot. They split off. Lot becomes the nations of Ammon and Moab, and Abraham goes on to produce his children, but they never reunite. We see this with Isaac and Ishmael. They split off. Ishmael becomes the father of 12 tribes, 12 nations in the desert regions, whereas Isaac, he goes on to produce his line, and they never reunite. And then lastly, we see the same thing with Jacob and Esau. They split. Esau becomes the father of Edom and the Edomites, and then Jacob will become the father of the Israelites, but they never reunite. There's never reconciliation within the family. And so we see something similar happen here. We see this split. Joseph is sent off to the land of Egypt, and the rest stay in the land of Canaan. And if this pattern was to continue, this pattern of separation and not being reunited, then we would be left with the family of promise is left in pieces. And so that would put the hope in danger, the hope of blessing that God promised through this family. It would be put in danger because this family is not whole. This family is not complete, which was a part of essentially God's promise to the patriarchs. So we're going to see a reversal of this division that has characterized the chosen people of God for the preceding chapters in Genesis. And now we're going to see that reversed, and now there's finally going to be reunification and reconciliation. And so just like how we compared that there was this pattern of murder that was first set between brothers by Cain and Abel, Cain murdering Abel, we saw that pattern was broken, but it came very, very close. Just like we said, slavery is very close to like murdering someone, selling them into slavery, though it's not the same. So that pattern was broken. And now we're going to see this second pattern of division is going to be broken when there's final reconciliation. So this final story of Joseph, when you take a step back and you look at what's going on here and you compare it to the rest of Genesis, you see that this story truly is a climax. It truly is a point where all of the evil and the negativity in the end is eventually reversed, and goodness comes out in the end, just as God had intended, just as God had promised. So we're going to look for, as we read, we're going to look for these themes coming up over and over again and how they're dealt with in the story of Joseph and his brothers. So in these chapters, 42 through 44 and 45, we're going to see that Joseph's brothers encounter him 3 times. They're going to meet Joseph a total of 3 times on separate occasions. And each time, we're going to see kind of this increasing emotional response on Joseph's part. And then the third time, it'll finally climax with Joseph revealing himself to his brothers and there being reconciliation. So chapter 42 is the first encounter. Chapter 43 is the second encounter. And then chapter 44, we're going to see the third encounter. So let's start looking through this. So chapter 42, we see it starts off that Jacob sees that there are provisions in Egypt, because we were just told at the end of chapter 41 that the famine had become severe throughout the whole world. So it's essentially the entire world, the entire region is under a famine. And so that means the family of Israel, the family of Jacob, is in famine. So Jacob sees that there's provisions in Egypt, and he tells his sons, he scolds his sons. He says, "Why do you keep looking at one another?" And so the image that we get is that Joseph's sons are essentially just standing there, just kind of looking around, looking at each other, not doing anything. They're not taking any initiative to protect their families, to get some food, to keep from going hungry, to stave off the famine. So they're just standing there doing absolutely nothing. And Jacob has to step in and says, "Why are you just looking at each other? Go and get some food in Egypt, like I have heard." And so then we also see that Jacob's favoritism continues. Despite that everything negative that has happened, because of favoritism in Jacob's life, he continues to show it. Jacob never changes, it seems, in this respect. He favored Rachel as his wife. He favored Joseph as his son, and when Joseph is gone, now he favors Benjamin. And that's expressed in that, verse 3, so 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to get grain rations in Egypt. For Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, since he feared that he might meet with disaster. So just like how Jacob would have Joseph go and report on his brothers. Remember when Joseph's brothers were shepherding the flocks over in Dothan, and Joseph was still with Jacob. The question is, why was Joseph with Jacob? And so maybe we get a reminiscent of that Joseph was not with his brothers doing the work that they should be doing. And now we see the same thing with Benjamin. Benjamin stays with his father while the rest of the brothers go and do the work of the family. So this favoritism continues. And so perhaps we could expect, oh no, wherever we see favoritism, something very bad is going to come of it. And so we continue. And notice, look at the details, what they're called. It says that in verse 3 again, so 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to get grain rations in Egypt. Pay attention to these relational epithets, to how they call certain characters. They're referred not to as Jacob's sons, but as Joseph's brothers. And so what this does is it highlights that the whole theme of this story is the relationship between the brothers. So now Joseph's 10 brothers, the ones who sold him to go down into Egypt, are now themselves going down into Egypt. And we know to eventually meet their brother Joseph. So they're characterized as Joseph's brothers. And then we also see that Benjamin is called Joseph's brother as well. It says, for Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin. And so what that does, it highlights Benjamin's special relationship with Joseph. First of all, because they're full brothers, but second of all, because they're both the recipient of unjust favor from their father. And so what the biblical authors call people in different instances serves to highlight certain aspects of their character. And that's what we see here. So now we go on to verses 6 through 9. And so the 10 brothers go down into Egypt, and all of a sudden they're in Egypt. We don't care about what happened in the middle, or at least the author didn't care about what happens in between. All of a sudden they're in Egypt, and it says, and Joseph's brothers came and bowed low to him with their faces to the ground. And so automatically we should be reminded of Joseph's dreams, that finally his dreams are being fulfilled after more than 2 decades. More than 2 decades after Joseph dreamed his dreams originally, finally they are being fulfilled when his brothers come and they bow down before him. And it even adds a phrase, with their faces to the ground. It doesn't usually have to say that. Oftentimes you'll just see, and they bow down before him. But it says, they bowed down with their faces to the ground, emphasizing the subservience, emphasizing the submission on Joseph's brothers' parts to Joseph himself. And so Joseph's dreams are finally realized, but the story isn't over yet. It's not just, oh, Joseph's dream is fulfilled, that's it. Because the main issue is that the family is, first of all, still in danger because of the famine. And secondly, the family is in danger because they are still divided. There is still no reconciliation. So the story continues. And then it says in verse 7, when Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them. Now, this again should immediately bring to mind other passages that we've already mentioned, where the term to recognize something is used. Remember, we saw it in chapter 37 when Joseph's brothers sent Joseph's bloodied tunic to their father and said, recognize, is this your son's or not? And then we saw it in chapter 38 when when Judah's daughter-in-law, Tamar, she sent the cord and staff and seal to him and said, recognize these, to whom these belong. And so we see this word again come up, the exact same word. Joseph recognized them. And so usually this recognition is due to, in the first instance, it was due to deceit. Joseph's brothers deceived their father Jacob by having him recognize their son's garment. Now Joseph is recognizing them. And so he keeps the truth to himself, though. He doesn't reveal himself at the beginning. He disguises himself. Then Joseph decides to speak harshly to them. It says that Joseph remembered his dreams, then he accused them of being spies. It says, this is in verse, which one was it? When Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he acted like a stranger toward them and spoke harshly to them. And then it says, for though Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Recalling the dreams that he had dreamed about them, Joseph said to them, you are spies. You have come to see the land in its nakedness. So it's interesting that they put these two phrases back to back. It says that Joseph remembered the dreams that he had about them. And then in the very next breath, Joseph accuses them of being spies. So perhaps we're supposed to read these two in connection. When Joseph remembers his dreams, that's when he accuses them. So we're left to guess. We're left to wonder, why does Joseph go on to accuse them of being spies? What does that have to do with his dreams? The author does not tell us. But we could ask, maybe it's because Joseph is trying to get back at them. He remembers his dreams and how they treated him, so now he's going to treat them harshly because he's mad at them. He's emotional towards them. Or is he planning on testing them? Maybe he has some overall plan. Oh, I'm going to say they're spies, and then this and this and this is going to happen, and then we'll be reconciled. Or maybe he's trying to just go along with his dreams so that they'll be fulfilled even more. Because if he accuses them harshly, then maybe they'll be more subservient to him. Who knows? The point is that we're never told, but it seems like these two phrases are put back to back for a reason. And not only that, but let's look at the argument that Joseph makes for why he accuses them of being spies. It's almost humorous because it actually doesn't really make any sense to us. So this is basically how it goes in paraphrase. Joseph first asked them, where do you come from? They said, we come from Canaan to buy food. And then he says, you're spies. And then they respond, no, we really came to get food. We're sons of one man. We're honest men. We've never been spies. And then Joseph says again, no, you've come to spy on the land. And then the brothers respond again, even more elaborately. No, we're 12 brothers, sons of a man in Canaan. The youngest is with our father, and one is no more. And then Joseph responds finally again, just like I said, you're spies, which doesn't make any sense. Why would anything that they have just told Joseph reveal that they're spies? There's no reason for it. They're just saying we came to buy food, we're brothers, and our youngest brother is with our father, etc. And then Joseph tells them, that they have to, if they want to prove their innocence, they have to bring their youngest brother. They have to go back, get their youngest brother, bring him back, and say, here's our youngest brother, and that would prove that they're not spies. Which also doesn't make any sense. How would that prove anything? First of all, they could grab anyone and say, this is our brother. Second of all, even if they did get their brother, they could still be spies. So what exactly is going on here? And if you pay closer attention, you'll realize it's not the surface argument that matters here. What really matters is what's going on underneath, beneath the surface. In everything that happens between Joseph and his brothers, what's really going on is the issue that started it all. It's going back to the roots of when Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery. And so we're supposed to continually have that in mind, that tension between the brothers as we read this story. So we're not worried about the surface reasons. Oh, you're spies, but you can prove you're innocent if you bring your youngest brother. What we could probably gain from this is that Joseph accuses his brothers of being spies because spies are deceptive. Spies end up being harmful to the ones that they are spying on. And so maybe there's a good reason why Joseph accused them of being spies. And that's because it reflects on their character. The brothers themselves were deceptive, just like spies are. They took Joseph's tunic and they deceived their father with it. And then secondly, why would Joseph make them prove their innocence by bringing the youngest brother back, Benjamin? So that maybe if they can verify that they're telling the truth, if they can prove that, yes, our youngest brother is safe and well with our father in the land of Canaan, if they can prove that Benjamin is still okay after what they did to Joseph, Joseph might be thinking, what have they done to my full brother, to Rachel's other son, Benjamin? So if they can prove that, then that would indeed prove their innocence in Joseph's eyes. So that seems to be what's really going on here. It doesn't say that explicitly, but we have to infer it because we're going to see that issue come up over and over again. So it only seems logical that that's what he's really referring to. Okay, and so we move on. So then Joseph throws them in prison, just like they had thrown him into the pit. Remember earlier the term pit was used for the prison that Joseph was in? That same term is not used here, pit, but it's still the prison that is reminiscent of the pit that Joseph was thrown into. So the roles are reversed. Joseph's brothers threw him into a pit. Now he throws all of them into a prison for 3 days. And then he changes his mind, it seems. And Joseph actually says, okay, instead of imprisoning all of you, I'll just imprison one of you. The rest of you can bring food back to your families. But if you want to come back, if you want your brother, and if you want to live, you have to bring your youngest brother. And then in verse 21, it says, the brothers said to one another, alas, we are being punished on account of our brother, because we looked on at his anguish, yet paid no heed as he pleaded with us. That is why this distress has come upon us. So it's just weird. 22 years later, they're finally in a hardship in Egypt. Something bad is happening to them. And where do their minds immediately go? It's to what they did to Joseph. So both on Joseph's part, this is about what they did to him. And even on their part, even though they don't know who they're talking to is Joseph, they're interpreting this as punishment for what they did to him. So really, everything that's going on here is about what they did to Joseph. The near murder, the essentially murder of Joseph by selling him into slavery. He is no more, they said. They don't know what happened to him, but he's as good as dead to them, because for all they know, he could be dead. So it's all about what they did to him. And then we discover that when they're talking amongst themselves, saying, this is because of what we did to our brother, they mention that he pleaded with them. We didn't hear that in chapter 37. So this adds to their guilt. It adds to the emotion of it. As they grab their youngest brother, their 17-year-old brother, they strip him of his cloak and throw him into the pit. We just learned that he was pleading with them not to do that to him. And so again, it just adds to the emotional depth of what they're experiencing. We didn't even care that he was pleading with us, and now we're getting what we deserve. And so then we learn that when Joseph, he understood what they were saying because they had a translator and they didn't realize that he could understand their language. When Joseph heard that, it says he turned away from them and wept. But he came back to them and spoke to them, etc. This is the first of 3 times that we're going to see Joseph weep. Each time he meets his brothers, remember he meets his brothers 3 times. Each time he meets them, he weeps. And each time he weeps more intensely. He weeps more emotionally. He weeps more loudly. And so this first time, all it says is he turned away and he wept, and then he came back to them. And so we're going to look for this as we continue on. Okay, so that essentially concludes the first encounter. They return to the land of Canaan. Simeon is left behind in prison. And they found out that the silver is back in their bags. The silver that they were supposed to have paid for all of the food with is now in their bags, and now they're freaking out because it's as if they had stolen from the Egyptians. And then they come back to the land of Canaan and they tell Jacob everything that happened. But they did change a few details. They didn't mention that Joseph said they would die if they didn't bring Benjamin back, and they didn't mention Benjamin until the very end. So again, look for this repetition with minor changes in details, because it seems like they made these changes to try and protect their father from emotional distress. In any case, Jacob becomes extremely upset again. He is the father. He has lost one son, Joseph. He has lost another son, Simeon, and now they want to take away Benjamin. And not only that, but Jacob says, Benjamin alone is left. And so again, the brothers are painfully reminded of the favoritism that Joseph has for Rachel's children. He says, my son must not go down with you. He says, my son, as if they're not his sons. My son must not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he alone is left. It's as if his other sons, he doesn't even consider them his sons. He's excluding them. Only Joseph is left. If he meets with disaster on the journey you are taking, you will send my white head down to Sheol in grief. The exact same thing he said about Joseph when he found out that he might have been dead. I will go down, my white head shall go down to Sheol in grief. And the same thing would happen to him if Benjamin was lost. So again, the favoritism. Jacob still hasn't learned. Okay, now the second encounter. They need to go back to the land of Egypt to get food because they're running out of food. And they can't go back unless they have Benjamin with them. So what they have to do is they have to convince their father, Jacob, to let Benjamin go with them so that they can go back and actually get some food. And then we see the same 2 brothers, the same 2 sons who had originally stepped up to save Joseph, now step up again. First, like last time, it's Reuben. Reuben steps up, and this is what he says to to Jacob. Then Reuben said to his father, "You may kill my 2 sons if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my care, and I will return him to you." Jacob doesn't even basically respond to that. He doesn't even acknowledge what Reuben has just said. He just said, "My son won't go down with you." So this is a ridiculous proposal on Reuben's part. He doesn't just say, "I'll make sure, father, that I bring Benjamin back." He says, "If I don't bring him back, you can kill my own 2 sons." And so what Reuben is essentially saying is, you lost 2 sons, Joseph and Benjamin, then I will lose 2 sons. You can kill my 2 sons. But he seems to forget that that's also Jacob's grandchildren, Jacob's grandsons. So why would he do that? That's absurd, to kill 2 people in place of two brothers being lost. So anyway, Reuben's attempt fails. It's disregarded by Jacob. But then in chapter 43, they're running out of food. The famine is especially severe. It's repeated. And so finally, Judah is the one who steps up. Just like Judah's plan was followed last time, Judah is the one who steps up and succeeds this time again. He has a much longer speech to Jacob, and he has a much more reasonable proposal. Judah said, "Send the boy in my care, and let us be on our way, that we may live and not die, you and we and our children." So Judah here is saying, we don't want anyone to die. Unlike Reuben, who said, "You can kill my 2 sons." "I myself will be surety for him. You may hold me responsible. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, I shall stand guilty before you forever. For we could have been there and back twice if we had not dawdled." So we see Judah's proposal is not, "You can kill anyone if I don't bring him back." It's, "I will be guilty before you forever." And so Judah's much more reasonable proposal is listened to by Jacob and followed. Jacob finally, he surrenders, and he says, "If I must be bereaved, I shall be bereaved." So he just relinquishes, he gives up to the fact that he's just going to be sorrowful no matter what. So he allows Benjamin to go with them. And so we see Joseph and his brothers, they go down to Egypt. Sorry, not Joseph. Judah and his brothers go down to Egypt. They take balm, honey, gum, ladanum, pistachio nuts, and almonds. They take twice the silver, and they take their youngest brother Benjamin. And what this should remind us of, always pay attention to these connections, because it has deeper meaning in it. What this reminds us of is the Ishmaelites. The brothers sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for silver. The Ishmaelites took Joseph down to Egypt, and they also had gum, balm, and ladanum. And so what we're essentially seeing is a repetition of the bringing down of Jacob's son to Egypt with all of these goods and this silver. Except this time it's Benjamin. And this time it's the brothers themselves who are bringing Benjamin down, not Joseph and the Ishmaelites. But that is put there to explicitly remind us of what happened to Joseph. So then, now is the second encounter. They go to meet Joseph with Benjamin. They're all there. They have everything. And they go to eat with Joseph in his house. And again, they bow down before Joseph. So each time they meet him, we're going to see them bow down. And they do it again, fulfilling the dream again. And then upon seeing Benjamin, in verse 30, first of all, 29, looking about, Joseph saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and asked, "Is this your youngest brother of whom you spoke to me?" And he went on, "May God be gracious to you, my boy." With that, Joseph hurried out, for he was overcome with feeling toward his brother, and was on the verge of tears. He went into a room and wept there. Then he washed his face, reappeared, and now in control of himself, gave the order, serve the meal. So this second time, just like they met him the first time, they bowed down, he accused them, and he wept. But it was just two actions. He turned aside, he wept, and he came back. This time, it's several actions. Joseph hurried out. He was overcome with feeling. He was on the verge of tears. He went into the room and he wept. He washed his face and he reappeared. 7 different verbs, at least, appear in one verse. So it shows you how emotional Joseph is getting when he sees his brother Benjamin, that he's alive and well, that he's safe. Perhaps Benjamin reminds Joseph of himself. The youngest brother with all of these other brothers around who probably are bitter towards him. We don't know that, but maybe Joseph is feeling this and it's all rushing back to him and he cannot control himself. So he has to go to another room to weep even more intensely than the last time. Then they have the meal. Joseph seats them in order of their birth, oldest to youngest. But then he gives Benjamin 5 times as much food as the rest of them. Again, the favor that Benjamin receives, not just from their father, but from this vizier of Egypt. He gets 5 times as much. And the brothers are again reminded of the favoritism that Benjamin receives. And then that brings us to this final section, which is chapter 44. Joseph again, he sends them away with all of their silver again, just like last time. But not only that, he adds an additional item. He takes his silver goblet and he puts it in Joseph's sack, in Benjamin's sack, in Benjamin's bag. And so then, when they leave, Joseph commands his servant, "Go and overtake them and accuse them of having stolen my silver goblet." And so that happens. The servant goes, overtakes them just outside the city, and he says, he relays the message from Joseph. "How could you take? Why did you repay good with evil? It is the very one from which my master drinks, and which he uses for divination. It is a wicked thing for you to do." So he accuses them of having stolen the goblet. And look at their response. And they said to him, "Why does my lord say such things? Far be it from your servants to do anything of the kind. Here we brought back to you from the land of Canaan the money that we found in the mouths of our bags. How then could we have stolen any silver or gold from your master's house? Whichever of your servants it is found with shall die. The rest of us, moreover, shall become slaves to my lord." They are so sure that they're innocent that they said, whoever has the silver goblet will die. And immediately that should remind you of another story in Genesis. When Laban chased after Jacob and his household and he overtook them, he accused them of having stolen the household gods, and Jacob was certain no one had done so. And he said, "Whoever is found with the household gods shall die." And that was Rachel. And so we saw, perhaps in history, commentators have viewed this as basically Jacob sealing Rachel's fate. After she bears Benjamin, she dies. And so now we see it happen with Benjamin. He is found with the goblet, and they had said, "Let him die." But then the servant of Joseph replied, "Although what you are proposing is right, only the one with whom it is found shall be my slave, for the rest of you shall go free." So Benjamin is not going to die, he says. He says, he'll just be my slave, and you're all going to go free. And so then what the brothers can now do is they can go, they can be rid of Benjamin, the other one whom their father favors, whom this vizier favors, whom everyone seems to favor. They can get rid of him too, and they can go back and they have a really good excuse. They didn't even do anything. They didn't have to do anything. They could just let it go. But what do? They decide to go back with him to the city in Egypt. When they found out that Benjamin had the goblet, they all tore their clothes in anguish and grief and distress. And they all went back Every single one of them, they went back to the city to try and plead with the vizier, to try and plead with him to let Benjamin go. And so what this shows is clearly a change of heart on the part of the brothers. Despite the fact that they are continually reminded that Benjamin is favored, they still are distressed that he is the one that has the goblet, and they all go back. And when they go back, they meet Joseph for the third and final time in Egypt. In this sequence of stories. And what happens when they meet him again, not only do they bow down to him, but it says, when Judah and his brothers re-entered the house of Joseph, who was still there, they threw themselves on the ground before him. They didn't just bow down. This isn't just a polite subservience. This isn't courtesy. This is desperation. They threw themselves down in front of Joseph, and they pleaded with him. But he refused. He said, far be it from me to act thus. Only he in whose possession the goblet was found shall be my slave. The rest of you go back in peace to your father. Even though they said, let us be slaves, not him, Joseph still refused. And so now they're all forced to put themselves in Benjamin's place. But for the third and final time again, Judah is the one who steps up. And Judah is the one who convinces Joseph, whom he doesn't know as Joseph, but he is the one who convinces the vizier to let Benjamin go free. And so from in chapter 44, verses 18 through 34 is a very moving and passionate speech on Judah's part. I highly recommend that you read through it. We don't have time tonight. It's lengthy. It's half the chapter, 44. But this is Joseph in his final, Judah in his final eloquent speech of desperation and sincerity. And it starts off with, then Judah approached him. So they're all standing there, or they had all fallen on the ground. Then we can picture Judah getting up, and he takes a few steps closer to Joseph, showing him how serious, how sincere, how desperate he is. And he gives this lengthy, eloquent speech. And I'll just read you the conclusion. Now, starting in verse 30. Now, if I come to your servant, my father, and the boy is not with us, since his own life is so bound up with his, when he sees that the boy is not with us, he will die, and your servants will send the white head of your servant, our father, down to Sheol in grief. Now your servant has pledged himself for the boy to my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, I shall stand guilty before my father forever. Therefore, please let your servant remain as a slave to my lord instead of the boy, and let the boy go back with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father unless the boy is with me? Let me not be witness to the woe that would overtake my father. So Judah's empathy, Judah's compassion is for his father. He has seen over and over again the grief that has stricken Jacob. Because of Joseph especially, he was inconsolable. Because of Simeon, and then because of Benjamin. And Judah does not want to see that again. He does not want it to happen to his father again. So what Judah does, what he offers, is he offers himself as a slave instead of Benjamin. This is the exact opposite of what we saw Judah say in chapter 37. Judah was the one who said, let's sell our brother Joseph into slavery. Now we see the exact opposite. Judah is saying, take me as a slave instead, and let Benjamin, the favored one, go free. And then in chapter 45, verse 1, it says, Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, have everyone withdrawn from me. So there was no one else about when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. Finally, Joseph makes himself known. He saw his sobs were so loud that the Egyptians could hear, and so the news reached Pharaoh's palace. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still well?" But his brothers could not answer him, so dumbfounded were they on his account. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come forward to me." And when they came forward, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. Do not be distressed or reproach yourselves, because you sold me hither. I was to save life. It was to save life that God sent me ahead of you," etc., etc. So again, in this third and final encounter between Joseph and his brothers, we saw them throw themselves at his feet. They pleaded with him, and then Joseph weeps for a third and final time in front of them. And this time, he throws everyone out. He weeps openly in front of his brothers so loudly that people outside can hear him cry, can hear him sobbing. And so each time he wept, it got more and more emotional until he cannot hold himself any longer. And so finally they're reunited. Finally they're reconciled. And it's all downhill from there. And so something I want to point out as we conclude this Joseph story, we only have another lesson or two before we finish Genesis. But what we did as we talked through this, what I always want you to try and pay attention to is look for the details, look for the repetitions, look for the allusions, look for the foreshadowing, look for the parallels, look for the intricate beauty of the words and the stories in these narratives. Because when you look for and you realize and you see these things, I hope that I'm demonstrating just a little bit of that to you in this series. When you pay attention to these details, it really comes to life. It really becomes a whole new story that we kind of aren't used to hearing, because we're used to just the summaries. We're used to just the gist. We remember we know the stories, we remember them, we remember what happens, but we don't often pay attention to these very small, intricate details. Because our faith has become highly intellectualized. It's what you believe in your head. It's what you know in your head. It's, oh, I know the doctrines. Oh, I know the stories. Oh, I know the commandments. But when we're reading through the narratives, especially in the Old Testament, they craft their stories purposefully, intentionally. And so we have to realize reading these stories is more about experiencing them instead of just knowing what they say. Because it's when you experience the story, you get the full emotional weight of it. And it's not just the facts that matter, though of course those matter. That's a huge part of the message. It's what comes from reading and experiencing the story as the authors wanted us to experience it. That's when we get the full measure of what God's word is to us. Not just skimming it, not just summarizing it, but really digging in deep and feeling the words that are being spoken. So that is my suggestion to us all as we read through these stories, as I'm trying to demonstrate by going through these stories in detail in Genesis. So as we sum up next week or the week after, I'm going to basically encapsulate all of the themes of Genesis. And I'm going to summarize all of the interpretive methods that we've been using and give you some examples of them so that you can take these methods and you can use them yourself as you read these stories again and pick up on things I didn't mention or that I didn't notice or that other people haven't noticed, and take it to other stories as well and really delve in to really experience God's word as he intended it. I pray this was instructive, and I hope to see you next week.